Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, let's go ahead and get these plastic covers off of here and use our 19mm to remove all 5 of our lug nuts located behind them. Remove your wheel. Now with the wheel out of the way, we have a nice clear view of the brakes. Now we're going to have to go ahead and start taking this apart. So what I want to do is go ahead and follow this e-brake cable to where it connects onto this control arm. We'll use a 13mm to remove that bolt. Alright, that's nice and loose. Now we're going to come right here. This is the area that holds the ABS wire to the e-brake cable. Just go ahead and pop that off of there so that has plenty of slack as well. Now let's move along to the back side of the caliper right here. We're going to go ahead and remove this caliper slider bolt using a 12mm. Go ahead and slide that bolt right out of there. Give it a quick inspection, set it aside. Now let's carefully get in between the bracket and the caliper itself, and we're going to gently pry to separate the two. This should just pivot upward. Once you have it pivoted upward, I'm just going to go ahead and wiggle it back and forth and gently pull it towards the center of the vehicle. As we're doing this, we're pulling that slider pin out of the top of the caliper bracket. There we are. I can slide this up here. Let's go ahead and get the pads out of here. Inspect your pads, set them aside. The next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and remove our 2 caliper bracket bolts. You're going to find one 15mm headed bolt right in this area here, and the other one's going to be located directly above it, easily accessed from up along the top of the rotor. Okay, now that bolt's nice and loose. I'm just going to go ahead and put it in there just a couple threads, and now we'll fully remove the second bolt. There's one bolt. Let's go ahead and fully remove that other one now. Remove that caliper bracket, set it aside. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and take off this boot right here. Just give it a little twist, pop it right off of there. Now let's go ahead and clean up this slider pin. Now the areas that you want to pay special attention to on that slider pin is of course the entire shaft. This is going to have to be able to move in and out inside that caliper. But also where you want to pay attention to is all the way down inside this groove right here. This is where the boot's going to sit. You need to make sure that it's free and clear of any debris in this area. That way there it can keep moisture and debris out. The next thing that we want to pay attention to is the caliper slider boot. Now this is the one that we took off the bracket itself, so what you want to do is just go ahead and give it a little squeeze, make sure it's nice and soft and pliable, and it doesn't look like it's torn or worn or damaged in any way. Assuming it looks good, let's continue on with our rag. I'm just going to go ahead and squeeze it right on through here, bring it out the other end. Now once I've done that, I'm just going to go ahead and spin this around. And that's pretty much going to clean out any of the dirt or debris or gunk that's located inside this boot, so of course we can replace it with some brand new lubricant. Now we're just going to want to give it a quick inspection, make sure it looks like it's good to go. That looks decent enough. Okay, so at this point we can start switching everything over from the original caliper bracket to the new caliper bracket. There's going to be some things that you want to swap over, such as maybe your caliper bracket tins and also your slider pin. When you're removing the slider pin, you're going to use a 10mm headed socket right here and go ahead and spin it right out of the caliper bracket. Let's do that now. Turn this sideways. Let's go ahead and clean the threads on this. Alright, so now at this point I went ahead and I cleaned up the threads. I also made sure that the shaft was clean and the shaft is clean on our slider itself, especially inside this area right here. Now typically what I like to do is just use a little bit of grease right inside this area. I'm just going to go right along this edge. It's going to end up working its way down on there as it should. Now once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and take this slider area and we'll just go ahead and push it right down over that. Clean up any residual grease that you have there. Now we can take this, we'll put it into the caliper bracket. Tighten that. Double check it. You want to make sure you have this side of the slider all the way down here. You don't want to have it in the opposite direction because this is the area that the boot has to sit on. Now we can continue with that caliper grease. We're going to go ahead and coat this entire shaft right here and making it our way up and into the groove. Once you have that done, let's continue on with that high temperature caliper grease, and we're going to do each of these 4 ears. This is essentially the areas where those tins for your pads are going to sit. Now we can go ahead and remove our tins from our original calipers. Give them a quick inspection. Make sure it doesn't look like they have any rot or buildup along the backside. Assuming they look fine, we can go ahead and slide it right on here. Now we're going to press it in and then give it a little wiggle to make sure it's completely secure. If it falls right off, that's obviously not tight enough. You just want to squeeze this down. Go ahead and do the same on the other side. Over at the car, we're going to start paying attention to the caliper. Of course, that's still connected to the car with the flex hose and that e-brake cable. What we want to do is go ahead and pull the slider right out of this area. So all I'm going to do is pull down on the boot. I'm going to press that slider pin up and through and carefully remove it from the boot. You want to, of course, make sure the entire sliding area right here is clean and free of any debris or pitting or any type of damage that might restrict it. Other than that, along each side of the slider pin, you're going to find those same divots as we cleaned up before. So, of course, you want to make sure you clean those up so no moisture or debris can make its way into the area. Now, with the slider pin out of there, we can continue on by removing the 2 boots for that slider. This one right here that's on the rear of the caliper, you can just carefully grab onto that and then pull it right off of the caliper. We'll give it a quick inspection, make sure it's still nice and soft and pliable, and of course clean it up just like the other boot. Since we're dealing with boots, we also have this one right here. Now this boot right here actually goes through the caliper itself, so right up along the area where my thumb is, you can kind of feel a ridge of that boot. So I'm just going to go ahead and try to press it on through there, grab onto the lower aspect, and draw it right out. Give it that quick inspection like what we did before, and of course clean it out. Now at this point, the caliper is stripped down, so let's continue on by cleaning up this area right along here, which is a ridge where that caliper slider boot needs to be. It's a good idea to, of course, at least try to clean up inside this area. And then also the same ridge that's on the other side and inside that port as well. In the spirit of cleaning, let's continue on with that wire brush. We're going to clean up this entire area in between here. This is where, of course, the rotor and those brake pads are going to be, so you want to make sure it's clean and free of any debris that might potentially fall into the brakes and cause an issue. Now this is looking really good. Let's continue on by pushing in this caliper piston. Typically on calipers, you can use some sort of clamp and just go ahead and try to press this right in, and the piston should go into its resting position. On this particular caliper, what you're going to see looking at the piston is that you have 2 little dimples on it. Now for those dimples, you're going to need a special tool that looks like this, that essentially fits into those dimples, and that way there we can go ahead and twist this piston as we try pressing it in at the same time. If you don't have this tool, you could also try using some long nose pliers. Typically that's a little bit harder. Okay. Now when I finish, what I want to do is have these dimples essentially facing straight up and down. So if this hole right here was right there, what I want to do is just turn this a little bit more, so essentially it's just straight. That looks pretty good. Let's set this aside. Let's use some high temperature caliper grease. We're going to come right up inside this slider hole right here. That's the area where the boot comes through. Also, we want to make sure we get up along this lip, up along here, at least in an area or two. Essentially, once we put it all together, we can spin everything around and work in that grease as needed. Now we're going to go ahead and slide our boot in there. To easily get this in there, what you can do is just gently squeeze it and then just roll it over. Essentially just like that. Put it right in. and then let it open up. There we are. Now I'm just going to go ahead and give it a little spin just to work in that grease real quick. Take a quick inspection, make sure that the boot's protruding all the way out here and it's flush. After that, we can do this top boot as well. We'll just take this, we're going to slide it right down and over that ridge. Give it a little spin, working in that grease. Now it's going to be time to go ahead and clean down this slider pin as well. After you've cleaned it, go ahead and give it a quick inspection. Make sure it doesn't have any dirt or debris or pitting of any sort, and also make sure you get inside each of those grooves. Now let's go ahead and use some of that caliper grease. I'm going to carefully get up and inside this boot right here, making my way up and into this area right there, which is essentially where this slider pin is going to go back and forth through. Continue with a thin coating of grease on the slider pin itself. Now I'm just going to go ahead and slide this through. What you're going to notice is the grease will make its way all the way up to this area, so you don't necessarily need to coat the area where your fingers are going to be. Just press it right up and in there. So as you can tell, it's pushing the grease. Just slide it back down so you can see. If you felt as though you wanted to, you could of course add a little bit more grease. Slide it right up and through here. Push this boot down so it's sitting inside the groove. Now just make sure it's sitting in the groove on both sides of that slider pin. This feels good, it's flowing nice and easily. Now let's make our way over to the other side. We're going to go ahead and get inside that groove right there where that boot's going to sit. And then we'll also try to get some inside this port right here. Let's also lubricate the caliper piston, the metal aspect of it, and then the backside of each of these ears. All this is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction overall. Now we can get our boot on here. Slide that right on the groove, give it a little spin just to make sure the grease is completely in there. A little more grease on there. Now it's going to be time to clean up the threading on all of our mounting bolts. Alright, so now we can take our caliper bracket bolts and that caliper bracket. We'll go ahead and get the bracket in position, sliding it over the rotor. Start in both of those caliper bracket bolts, snug them up. Alright, so now that I have them both bottomed out, let's torque each of these to 91 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to install our brake pads. You want to pay attention to the wear indicator on each of the pads. For that, you want to have it facing so that as this rotor is going to be turning, this is going to be getting pulled away from in towards the brakes. Just in case it ends up getting to the wear indicator, it's not going to go ahead and toss it into the brakes while you're driving. Slide that right into position. Now what you want to do once you get them in there is just make sure that they can still flow around easily. If you have to use a hammer to try to bonk them in, more than likely something isn't cleaned properly. Slide that right on. Now we're going to carefully bring this down and over. Should slide right over those pads. Make sure you push that slider out of the way. Now we can get that caliper slider bolt in. Wiggle it around. Go ahead and bottom this out, and when you torque this, torque it to 20 foot-pounds. Now let's make our way in here. We're going to re-secure our emergency brake bracket to this control arm. For this, you don't need to use any red thread locker, but I would use a little bit of copper never seize. Now once you have that on there, of course you're going to want to re-secure your ABS wire to the e-brake cable. Make sure that's on there. Alright, let's go ahead and get this lug nut off of here. Now we can go ahead and put on our wheel. We'll start on all the lug nuts and bottom them out. Once the wheel is safely back on the ground, go ahead and torque each of these to 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. torqued. Of course, we're going to put back on our plastic covers, make sure those are all bottomed out and snug. Okay friends, we got that caliper bracket in there. What do you want to do now? Typically, you're going to want to go ahead and make sure you pump up that brake pedal so it's nice and firm. Climb under the hood, double check that master cylinder just to make sure it's completely full of .3 brake fluid up to the maximum line. After that, take it for a road test. Thanks for watching.